If you've just arrived, welcome to the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the Friends Lecture Series. I'm Barbara Proschel, president of the Friends. Thank you for joining us today for this special last lecture of the season. We will take the summer off and then kick off again in September. Tonight, we'll hear from author and curator Joe Earle, who has come all the way across the pond from London to speak about Mia's exhibition, Transcendent Clay, the Kondō family's path to porcelain innovations. This fabulous exhibition is now on view in galleries 251, 252, and 253 on the second floor. As a special bonus, following the lecture, we'll have a lively panel discussion, and Mr. Earle will be joined on stage by 4 more special guests. This panel discussion will be moderated by Andreas Marks. Andreas is Mia's Mary Griggs Burke Curator of Japanese and Korean Art. But first, let's have a word from our sponsor. This lecture is presented by the Friends of the Institute and made possible with generous support from the Mark and Mary Goff Fitterman Fund. Our deep thanks to Chris Erickson. Chris, would you please stand? Chris is the fund trustee, and she has been so supportive and wonderful to work with. So thank you, Chris. Oh, now we have the slide. So if you note some of our upcoming Friends events, the book club discussion and tour is on the book Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. Our coffee and scones for new members is on June 11th. And our last fundraiser of the year, Restoring a Landmark at the Basilica of St. Mary on June 12th. For more information about these events or to join the Friends, visit friends.artsmia.org or call the Friends office. Okay, just a quick reminder to please silence your cell phones, and during the question and answer period, microphones will be passed around. And now I'd like to introduce Andreas Marks, who will in turn introduce Joe Earle. Dr. Andreas Marks oversees Mia's renowned collection of Japanese and Korean art. Andreas joined the museum in 2013 from the Clark Center for Japanese Art and Culture in California, and luckily he brought the Clark holdings with him. With many, many exhibitions curated, lectures given, and books and essays authored in the field of Japanese art, Dr. Marks was awarded the Commendation of the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs for his contribution to the promotion of Japanese culture. Perhaps you saw Dressed by Nature, which was an exhibition that Andreas curated here at MIA in 2022 on Japanese textiles. It was quite exquisite. So without further ado, please help me welcome Andreas Marks to the stage.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm very delighted to see that so many people survived the tornado today and are joining us tonight for this lovely event here. I have the great honor to introduce one of my literal fathers, one of the people why I'm allowed to be in this country. So years ago, when I came to the United States, I needed a visa. And in order to get a visa, you need a letter of sponsorship, and Joe Earle happens to be one of the people who very nicely wrote a very lovely letter that convinced the American government to let this German come into the country. So I have a personal connection to Joe, and but there is more. So let me explain to you why we are honored to have him here tonight. After graduating from Oxford University, Joe Earle joined the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. In 1983, he was appointed Keeper of the Far Eastern Department at the V&A, the youngest person ever to hold such a post in a UK National Museum. He continued to work there in various roles until 1990, when he became an independent curator. From 1998 to 2003, he was consultant to the Japanese department of Christie's London. In 2003, Joe Earle left Europe. I meant the UK. He left the UK and moved to the United States because he was named the first chair of the Department of Art of Asia, Oceania, and Africa at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. In 2007, he left Boston to serve as director for the Japan Society Gallery in New York. It is in that role that I met him for the first time 17 years ago, because he curated the exhibition New Bamboo and asked for loans from the Clark Center in California, where I then became the director. It was a groundbreaking exhibition showcasing the stunning sculptures that are created by some contemporary bamboo artists in Japan. And Joe created this exhibition 10 years before the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York displayed their bamboo exhibition, which they claim to be the first in this field. In 2011, Joe retired from Japan Society Gallery and eventually returned to the UK. But we are grateful that he didn't retire completely, and he is senior consultant at the auction house Bonhams. Joe published extensively over the years on netsuke, inro, lacquer, metalwork, ceramics, textiles, bronzes, paintings, bamboo. The list goes on and on, but thank you, Joe, for leaving me the prints. So at least I've got something to do. Joe is continuing to research and offer books like the one that we have here, Transcendent Clay, that accompanies the Kondō family traveling exhibition, which today is about. So please welcome Joe.
Well, thank you, Andreas, and thank you, Barbara, and thank you, the friends. Am I near enough to the mic? Can you hear me? Good. And for a wonderful welcome and hospitality already. Now, I think a lot of you know quite a bit about contemporary Japanese art and craft, and probably many of you, when you hear the words Japanese, craft, and family, or lineage in combination, you're apt to think in terms of creative dynasties that stretch far, far, far back in time. For example, one thinks of the Myochin family of Japanese armourers who concocted a false genealogy starting in the 12th century that boasted at least 60 generations. More truthfully, the Ichikawa Danjiro kabuki actors, I expect many of you have seen kabuki in Japan, they're currently on their 13th generation. The Sen Soshitsu masters of Chanoyu, the tea ceremony, 16th generation, or in the world of ceramics, the Nakazato Taroemon family in Karatsu are on the 15th. The Sakaira Kakiemon porcelain specialists are on the 16th. And so it goes on. And this is indeed a wonderful cultural phenomenon, and one that is especially distinctive of Japan, but it doesn't apply to the Kondō family, whose work we celebrate this evening. Nor, as we shall see, does it apply at all to Tomimoto Kenkichi, the famous teacher of Kondō Yūzō, the first Kondō ceramic artist. Before we look in a little bit more detail at Kondō Takahiro, who we're delighted to have with us today, and whose work makes up the bulk of this wonderful show, I'd like to spend a few moments slightly rethinking the early part of Kondō Yūzō's career. Even the Kondō's family's best integration of techniques, let me just find an example. The best integration of techniques, wheel-thrown porcelain with blue cobalt pigment decoration under clear glaze, has a relatively short history in Japan. compared to the stoneware products of the medieval kilns, or for that matter, compared to the history of blue and white in China. It only reached Japan's southwesternmost main island of Kyushu about 400 years ago, and didn't even get to Kyoto for many decades after that. Far from being rooted in a hallowed craft tradition, the Kondō's family's practice, not much more than a century old, developed during an era of profound political, intellectual and cultural turmoil, and has been subject from the start to a plurality of influences from the Asian continent and around the world, as well as from Japan itself. So here we have two works, one by Tomimoto Kenkichi on the left, and one by Kondō Yūzō on the right. Now, what's the story behind this? These are both, it's quite an early work. In the case of Kondō Yūzō, we have very little of his work from much earlier than 1938. The future living national treasure, Kondō Yūzō, grandfather of Takahiro, his father was named Shohei, and he fully realized that with the sudden demise of the shogunate, Japan's old military regime, his father, by the way, was a samurai, and the creation of a semi-constitutional nation state and a project to avoid colonization and indeed become a world power, meant things had changed. His many children would have to pursue independent careers, and so it was that at the age of 12, Yūzō, fresh out of elementary school, was enrolled as a trainee in Kyoto's new government-sponsored ceramic development center. He proved a quick study, and soon more than mastered the essentials of forming clay vessels on a potter's wheel, the craft that forms really, even now, the basis of everything that goes on within the Kondō ceramic tradition. Such were his talents that in 1921, still only 19 years old, he was recommended by no less an artist by legendary potter Hamada Shoji. That's the only potter 50 years ago with a truly, Asian potter with a truly international reputation. Hamada Shoji recommended the young man for the post of assistant to Tomimoto Kenkichi, 16 years Yūzō senior, and set to become one of the most influential names in the 20th century, in the history of 20th century Japanese ceramics. At this distance of time, it's easy to think of Tomimoto as a kind of unchanging, authoritative, even maybe authoritarian institution, which was perhaps his persona when he became a leading teacher of ceramics some 20 years later in the 1950s. But it's important to remember that in 1921 he was really only just starting out. In fact, Tomimoto allegedly, although he's the teacher and Kondō was the pupil, he allegedly threw his first pot in 1912, only a couple of years before Yūzō. And quite unlike his assistant, he had no formal training or experience as an apprentice. He was, as Kida Takuya, ceramic scholar, has described him, a self-proclaimed amateur. Just like Yūzō, he did not emerge from a tradition of professional potters. Far from being rooted in tradition, or at least any one tradition, by the time Yūzō encountered the charismatic Tomimoto Kenkichi, the latter had been subject to a plurality of influences and experiences. A wealthy upbringing in a landowning family, where the appreciation of fine old ceramics was part of his everyday cultural formation, and starting in 1908, a year and a half in England, where he was amazed to see craft objects displayed with equal reverence to paintings and sculpture in the South Kensington Museum, the precursor of the Victoria and Albert Museum where my career started out. And he also became aware of the arts and craft movement with its opposition to over-rapid industrialization and modernization, and an opposition that was already being felt in Japan at this time after the headlong economic growth of the Meiji era. And most famously, Tomimoto had the experience of meeting in Japan, not in the UK, the British legendary studio ceramist to be Bernard Leach, I'm sure you've all heard of, and becoming enthralled by him with the raku tradition of ceramic creation. On top of all these influences, not long after Yūzō started work as his assistant, Tomimoto made a highly significant visit to Korea, where he helped organize an exhibition of the country's latest ceramics, admiring and sketching not only pure white porcelain moon vases, so popular today and fetching such enormous prices at auction, but also the dynamic, spontaneous, painted decoration seen on many types of Korean ware like this. One at the Korean piece on the left from the Met, and a piece by Tomimoto Kenkichi on the right, which I was lucky enough to be able to purchase for the museum while I was there in 2004, I think, in Boston. And even occasionally, he would try his hand. This is a piece that I was surprised to discover that the Boston Museum had required subsequently. Tomimoto would even occasionally try his hand at Korean inlaid greenware. Now, when we look at two relatively early works of Kondō Yūzō, in both the blue and white, and trust me, in the greenware mode, that's a black and white photograph, both of them, by the way, are beautifully thrown, as we would expect. And the one on the left is really quite an early example of his work. It's interesting to speculate about the relationship between Tomimoto, the privileged, charismatic, well-traveled amateur, and Kondō, the diligent graduate of a technical college. Unlike the majority of professional craft makers at the time, Tomimoto did not receive intensive apprentice-based instruction from a master, nor did he, unlike Kondō Yūzō, train at one of the newly established technical ceramic institutes. Perhaps then, the relationship was more mutual than Tomimoto would have cared to admit, or Kondō would have dared to claim. Perhaps we can talk to Takahiro about this later. Over the 3 years that Yūzō spent living and working in Tomimoto's home, just outside the ancient city of Nara near Kyoto, Tomimoto, of course, exercised a decisive influence on the younger artist. But my sense from what has been written, and more especially perhaps what has not been written about those early years, that it was perhaps Tomimoto's lack of training as a thrower. His throwing skills were still evolving, to quote to quote Yūzō's grandson with us today, Kondō Takahiro. Tomimoto's throwing skills were still evolving. So it was the need for instruction rather than simply the need for an extra pair of hands that led him to seek skilled assistance. It's interesting to learn again from Kondō Takahiro himself that for 3 years Yūzō served as Tomimoto's rokuro is the wheel, the potter's wheel assistant, and at the same time learned from Tomimoto what it means to be a true kojin sakka. And then we should consider also Tomimoto's parting comment to Kondō when he decided to return home and become an independent potter. Kondō, at this point your throwing technique doesn't need any improvement, but your ceramics will continue to improve if you study and learn about things other than porcelain. I begin to get the feeling that this relationship was perhaps more one between a sophisticated, visionary, intellectual mentor and man of the international art world on the one hand, and on the other hand, a patient artisan who taught his master by example. But we can never tell. Much, and possibly too much, has been written about Tomimoto's views on ceramic form and decoration, including his observation in 1940 that looking upon a jar, what's most important is its form. Glaze and surface designs are just decoration for the main form. Of course, glaze and patterns play an important part in bringing out beauty, but the source of life in three-dimensional jars is form. This privileging of form over ornament reflects Tomimoto's international outlook and seems very much aligned with the principles of European modernism as enunciated in the early 20th century by writers such as Adolf Loos, who once wrote an essay, I think, called Decoration and Crime. He said, "The evolution of culture marches with the elimination of ornament from useful objects." Even more has been made of Tomimoto's declarations in 1917 that he would absolutely only create patterns I have never seen before, and again in 1940, the most quoted of all, "I will not create patterns from patterns." These statements seem unremarkable today, but would have sounded revolutionary to the young Kondō Yūzō, whose earlier ceramic training, although it's undocumented, doubtless involved a lot of obedient repetition of earlier designs. If we visit the website of the Kondō Museum today, we read that in his 70-odd years of pottery making, Yūzō tried out all sorts of ceramic techniques. In his early years, he was selected to the Teiten and Bunten exhibitions from around 1955, and that's a big jump. That's 35 years from when he started out in 1920. From about 1955, he began to produce mainly underglazed blue and white ceramics, which he exhibited at the Japan Traditional Crafts Exhibition and other exhibitions. On his own wheel-thrown pots, he made sketches of plum, pomegranate and thistle motifs from his home, and painted them as ceramic pictures. You can hear our guest artist today talking about the idea of painting pictures on ceramics in a video in the current exhibition. Interestingly, the Kondō Museum family website does not show any examples of Yūzō's work for the Teiten Imperial Exhibition, which first admitted works of Bijutsu Koge, art crafts, including ceramics, in 1927. And it doesn't show his works in the Shimbun-ten and the Nitten, even though Yūzō showed his works regularly at all three from 1928 until 1951. To understand Kondō Yūzō's evolution from tentative Tomimoto deshi, disciple, to the master of a distinctive style that he would maintain from the 1950s to the 1980s, and you can see in the museum today, it's perhaps worth, perversely maybe, looking briefly at the Teiten and Bunten submissions of some other leading ceramic artists, mostly 10 or 20 years older than Yūzō, and the majority of them also from Kyoto. These few examples may help us to understand Yūzō's trajectory by showing us some of the ceramic paths he chose not to tread. After ceramics and other crafts were admitted in 1927, the official criteria for acceptance to the Teiten were that the work had to be original, which was something of a departure, meaning that the designer must have executed the piece by himself, a condition that was difficult to satisfy in the field of ceramics, since many artist potters had become accustomed to designing a work's form and surface, but have assistants play a large part in the throwing, glazing, and firing. Tokyo-based Itaya Hazan, seen here on the left, for example, worked all his life with a throwing assistant. Kawamura Seizan, seen on the right, was one of several artists whose work often seems to emulate similar forms created in metal, the material of choice for many modernist leading designers at the time. The hugely influential Kusube Yaichi, master of a myriad of styles, here produces an Art Deco version on the left of a well-known motif on a body that was first thrown but then applied with 4 sharp edges, again reminiscent of work in metal, but takes a very different direction in the eclectic, faceted vase on the right, made 6 years later. Successive generations of the mighty Kiyomizu Rokubei dynasty also experimented widely during the first half of the 20th century, from what might be described as a stylized proto-deco style of decoration here, to work stimulated by the boom in the availability of ancient Chinese artifacts, starting in the 1920s in the right, with a gravito technique borrowed from Chinese Suzhou ware. Now, if we move from Kyoto to Tokyo and the pupils of Itaya Hazan, we find new techniques for ornamenting ceramics. In the work of Miyanohara Ken, building up glaze on the surface, inlaying one glaze into another, or sculpting and applying glaze away from the body to reveal a semi-abstract design. Or, if we look at Yasuhara Kime, a prolific national exhibition exhibitor over a period of more than a quarter of a century, who worked with the radical Ikebana pioneer Teshigahara Sofu, and integrated elements of avant-garde European movements such as Surrealism and Cubism. Meantime, what of Kondō Yūzō? Few surviving examples of his work from the 1930s are known, but looking at these small black and white images taken from a 1980s compilation of national exhibition catalogues, arranged here in chronological order, from 1930 to the one on the end, which is 1928 to 1941. Looking at these, we can glimpse a more patient process of exploration compared to the contemporaries we looked at a moment ago. Loyalty to closely observed plant forms, as advocated by Tomimoto, continues. Borders and other extraneous elements are reduced, and on the whole, designs become a little less crowded. But even toward the end of the period, blue and white is not yet the established norm. The latest, at bottom right, is again a Korean-inspired slit and inlay technique. This rare published survival from 1946 suggests a more decisive shift toward the style by which Kondō Yūzō is most remembered, but it's still a long way from the Kondō Yūzō style we know and love. Just as the Kondō Museum states, he didn't make the breakthrough to this marvelously fluid, marvelously integrated marriage of form and decoration until he was in his early 50s. and indeed still somewhat took his cue from Tomimoto Kenkichi, who continued to paint vessels with spontaneous-looking landscape scenes and other motifs that mirror the senior artist's love affair with Korean ceramics, but now, in his case, combined with intricate textile-inspired surface designs using gold and silver. Using gold and silver, hold that thought for what we see later on, as well as a range of enamel colours. And these would make Tomimoto one of the first artists to earn the newly minted title of Living National Treasure in 1935. Now, this exhibition, which I just had the privilege of seeing for the very first time a couple of hours ago, is a wonderful opportunity to explore the richness, variety, and growing independence of Yūzō's achievement, marked by the complementarity of form and decoration for which he is so admired today, achieved thanks to superlative potting skills and the ability to anticipate an intended surface design while still shaping a piece on the wheel, marvellously shown here in the way that the mountain is applied to the shoulder of the vase. None of that happens by chance, of course. As well as his works with gold overlay and gold and red glaze, all achievements that would make him too a living national treasure in 1977. Now, before we move on to the latter generations, I'm just going to take a drink of water. He passed on the style to his second son, Hiroshi, the father of Takahiro, who took over responsibility for the family kiln and continued to work with distinction in his own version of what we might call Kondō blue and white manner, adding a note of unmistakable boldness to the family style. And here we come to the first work by Kondō Takahiro, again working in a bold version of the family blue and white style, with natural forms deftly applied to beautifully thrown potted forms. In 1990, the very year after he painted this willow jar, Kondō Takahiro was selected to represent the Kondō family with a solo exhibition of his work in São Paulo, Brazil. And if you look carefully at one of the videos or video material in the exhibition, you'll see a poster from that exhibition on the wall of his studio. The exhibition was warmly received, with articles in local newspapers singling out Takahiro as the best of the new generation of Kyoto blue and white specialists. Interviews given by the artist during his visit reprise a familiar narrative, according to which the latest representative of a Japanese art dynasty claims to follow in the family tradition while discreetly introducing an element of modernity into his work. Nevertheless, conflicting with this politely conventional narrative, Takahiro's more recent recollections of his time in São Paulo reveal that his conversations with local Japanese painters and sculptors, of whom there are many in Brazil, had alerted him to the limitations of a practice confined to pleasing scenes from nature applied in blue pigment to the surfaces of perfectly thrown porcelain vessels. Back in Japan, he started to experiment. He painted on canvas for the first time and embarked on a series of bold experiments in oils and acrylics, as well as other media of his own devising, such as ceramic clays applied to paper, which he called doro ingu, doro meaning mud, doro ingu is a sort of pun, mud drawing. He even abandoned wheel-thrown forms in favour of rectilinear shapes created by hand-building, using rolled-out slabs of porcelain clay to make flat surfaces better suited to the abstract style of motif-making seen in the earliest of his non-traditional works in this exhibition. And you can see a video of a later work and demonstrates his skill in slab building and slab cutting. And this square vase is entitled Yin-Yang Decoration. The Yin-Yang decoration and other works in the series ingeniously combine the familiar and indeed familial medium of cobalt blue over refined white porcelain with innovations such as a separately applied, fragile-looking sharp lip that we see here, especially clearly in the smaller image, and parallel line motifs combed into the still soft body. Each of these square vases, made between 1991 and 1999, contributed to a developing artistic project, summarized by an anonymous critic in Japan who wrote that, although Kondō makes traditional blue and white porcelain, he is grappling with the idea of transcending the stylized boundaries of blue and white to create something that expresses his inner visual world. A major spur to Kondō Takahiro's restless, questing artistic endeavor, and wonderfully represented in the show with some, not just from the core exhibition loaned by Jeffrey and Carol Horvitz, but also some local loans as well. A major stir to his questing artistic spirit was the example of his uncle Yutaka, whose career had taken a very different direction until his untimely death in 1983. A free yet troubled spirit and a skilled linguist with many interests outside the world of ceramics, Yutaka studied with both his father and Tomimoto and started off making blue and white porcelain. How could he not? But in 1961, he abruptly left Kyoto to take up an invitation to teach ceramics not so far from here at the University of Indiana, later traveling widely in the United States, Europe, Papua New Guinea, Afghanistan, New Zealand, and Korea. Uncle Yutaka became particularly interested in a type of Korean ware called buncheong, well represented in the marvelous Korean ceramic collection in this museum, that he often encountered in Western collections. The decoration of buncheong ware is created, similar to this piece, by incising or stamping an intricate repeated pattern, then covering it with semi-liquid white clay that is wiped off the raised section of the surface, filling only the depressions. Returning from his travels, Yutaka rejected porcelain in favor of stoneware, again as we see here, absorbing something of the spirit of Kyoto's influential Sordesha group of avant-garde ceramists, whose work you will see here in, is it next year or the year after? Ask Andreas afterwards. Influenced somewhat by the Sordesha group, he began to create a series of signature works in which his version of buncheong is combined with his trademark sponge textured black glaze. And other works in the exhibition further attest to his questing, restless spirit and engagement with Western abstraction. This one with areas of bare red clay and a double neck that challenges conventional ideas of utility, very much in the Sordesha spirit. And another with a different version of the artist's favorite impress and inlaid patterning, here arranged in concentric circles. Yutaka's example helped convince Takahiro of the seriousness of ceramic art as an endeavor, and encouraged the novice potter, just like his grandfather, I would argue, to take nothing for granted and to explore the possibility of new styles and techniques of form and surface decoration. His experiments in blue and white, his family's distinctive technique, seems to have come to an abrupt halt in 1999, as inner restlessness and a desire to escape accepted definitions of ceramic art led him in new directions, spurred from the late 1990s into the mid-2000s by his exposure to the international art world and his development and discovery of new materials, starting with ginteki or ginteki-sai, silver mist. Now, while the exact details of its ingredients and manufacturing process remain a trade secret in a way, in essence, ginteki is made from silver and frit, a mixture of silica and fluxes, to which Takahiro later added gold, platinum, and other materials, mixed to form a paint that is brushed on the surface of a ceramic vessel. And here we need to think perhaps of the example of his grandfather, who later in his career also experimented with the use of gold on ceramic. The example on the left here, it was specially created as a sample of what he can do in the field of ginteki-sai by the artist. And if you're ever lucky enough to get a book from the limited edition of his retrospective volume that came out 2 years ago, there's a limited edition that has at the back a sheet of plexiglass into which is inlaid this marvelous little bit of porcelain, which gives you a chance to admire close up in your own home as you read the book this amazing ginteki technique. And of course there are many impressive examples in this exhibition. During kiln firing, as you can see from the detail here, the droplets of paint solidify. In the words of the artist himself, taking on an appearance that looks almost more like water than real water, or, according to his mentor, leading cultural theorist and historian Inaga Shigemi, forming minute convex mirrors that each echo the shapes of their identical neighbors, mutually setting off each other in an infinite series of reflections. Kondo's earliest works featuring ginteki, such as the galaxy pieces in this exhibition on the right here, marked the start of a major change in direction. As the artist himself recently put it, this technique, an essential component of my artistic identity, has now taken over from blue and white decoration as the defining characteristic of my contemporary work, rather than kyoyaki, Kyoto ceramic ware. It's also largely thanks to silver mist, ginteki, that starting in the year 2000, I was able to extend my practice and include pieces that were more sculptural in character. Here's another example. Starting in 1993, Kondō had paid several brief visits to Scotland, but a much longer stay in the United Kingdom from September 2002 to December 2003, just at the very moment when I'd abandoned the UK and moved to America, now I think about it, marked a turning point in his production and in the way in which he thought about ceramics and ceramic art. In 2002, he enrolled in the Master of Design program at Edinburgh College of Art. Prompted by a piece he saw in the museum's glass department that, quote, looked to me just like ice or melting snow, unquote, he decided to devote much of his time in Scotland to mastering the skills required for glass casting. Inspiration of another kind came from a trip to the Orkney Islands, again featured in video material in the exhibition, off Scotland's northern coast, where Kondō saw, here he is contemplating it, the Ring of Brodgar, a vast ancient stone circle made, in his words, of, quote, huge works connecting heaven and earth, life and death, past and future. Journeying south of the border to London, he was able to experience the international art scene in the same year, 2003, the British artist Grayson Perry, born in 1960 and now a national treasure, not officially, but definitely a national treasure, was awarded the prestigious Turner Prize in recognition of, I quote, his use of the tradition of ceramics and drawing in his uncompromising engagement with personal and social concerns. That's another thought I'd like you to hold in mind, thinking of the discussion we're going to have after this presentation. This idea of using ceramics to express social and personal concerns, and other concerns as well. While a vast aesthetic conceptual gulf and personality gulf, I would say as well, separates Kondō's work from that of Grayson Perry, here he is, the shock of learning that an artist whose practice included pots could enjoy such a high level of critical esteem and global name recognition prompted Kondō to think deeply about his future direction. During an important and revealing interview in 2004, after his return to Japan, Kondō went on to express a vision for ceramics in Japan that clearly reflects what I think we can call his Grayson Perry moment. Not in the specifics of Grayson Perry, but in the general spirit of what artists such as Perry and now Kondō have done for the field of ceramics. Here's what he said. I'm not really interested in debates about the distinction between craft and sculpture, about what's traditional and what's contemporary art. The important thing is for Japanese ceramics to escape from a sense of national self-sufficiency and achieve recognition on the international stage. We need to ask ourselves how we can have our work recognized, not merely as craft, but as art. Not only did Kondō's vision to Orkney reinforce his awareness of affinity between sophisticated glaze effects and the element of water, this idea of water and fire meeting, but the scale of the Brodgar stones, ranging in height as they do from around 7 to as many as 15 feet, suggested to Kondō another escape from traditional to contemporary. Building on the idea of combining porcelain and glass, he began to construct large-scale works. You can see the heights here, they're from 5.5 to 6.5 feet. Each assembled from a pile of blocks of porcelain placed on top of one another. These blocks were separated by one or more blocks of cast glass, sometimes clear, sometimes with suspended colouring in black, green or red. And this fabrication strategy, in parts, liberated him from the size limitations of his small Kyoto kiln. Called monoliths, using the English word, monoliths, these structures combine hard-won manual and material skills, Eastern and Western, Eastern ceramic, Western glass, to push the boundaries between conventional Japanese ceramics and the potential of clay as a medium of contemporary art. Viewed simply as forms, the strikingly sculpted monoliths make a unique and memorable contribution to global ceramic art, but their varying surface and textures also merit close attention. In combination with silver mist effects, the monoliths also feature underglazed black and white, blue and white, black and grey, or green, or even nerikomi marbling, a marbleized mix of black and white porcelain clay, an effect seen again on a much smaller scale in the silver mist bowl here. It's enormous here, but actually only 4 inches in diameter, resembling the unpredictable surging energy of billows and spray. Now here I'd like to touch briefly on a parallel aspect of Kondō Takahiro's work, which is away from Kyoto in Honshu, in the northern part of Honshu, a long way away from his home base. The annual workshops that he's held since 1998 at Shichikashuku, a town at the foot of Mount Zawo in the Tohoku region, where he works with a simple Nomorigama, a climbing kiln, with an ascending series of firing chambers that is naturally fired, not using gas or electricity. This side of his work took on special significance after the Great East Japan earthquake of March 11th, 2011, which we all remember so well, and the subsequent Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant explosion. The disaster sparked a large-scale project at Shichikashuku, when Kondō worked with members of the workshop to dig local clay and make small ceramic bowls, firing them in the Nomorigama, and then distributing them to displace victims of the earthquake and the tsunami. Working on a pottery wheel for the first time in many years, he made nearly 2,000 of these inochi no utsuwa, vessels of life, over a period of 5 years beginning in 2012, including a group of 11 bowls which were, I think, are featured in some versions of this exhibition, but maybe not this one. So my text is incorrect there, I'm sorry. But here you can see then what's also interesting to me about this installation is that these are bowls made for distribution to serve an actual need, but he also found the time and had the creativity to make this wonderful sort of almost abstract art installation out of them in this wonderful traditional interior up in Shichikashuku. But now we return to the artist's mainstream, Kyoto-based practice. In 2008, at the age of 50, Kondō began to make self-portraits, taking molds of his own head and casting them in porcelain applied with a variety of glazes and silver mist on occasion. One starting point for this new departure was the fact that his uncle Yutaka, who had in part inspired Kondō to devote himself to ceramics, had died at the same age, 50. The artist's liking for remote elemental settings is evident in a striking group of 5 more heads from 2010, 2 years later, illustrated here by a photograph taken at the ancient settlement of Skara Brae, which maybe some of you have been to. It's a World Heritage Site, and together with the Ring of Brodgar, constitutes one of the earliest inhabited sites in the whole of Northern Europe. These 2010 heads also lead us, these outdoor fired heads, many of the heads were made in the normal way in his Kyoto kiln, but others are fired outside, lead us to another important aspect of Kondō's practice, noyaki, outdoor firing. In 1996, he had taken part in his first mass noyaki event, organized as a reenactment of a volcanic eruption on Mount Mihara on Izu Oshima, an island in the Pacific Ocean, about 60 miles southwest of Tokyo. These firings, and here's an example carried out in Hawaii, are essentially performative events, typically accompanied by much dancing, drumming, and Shinto religious ritual, and the resulting works are only rarely put on public view. The spiritual nature of the manner in which the 5 heads we just saw came into being at a similar noyaki, conceived as a celebration of man and nature in creative harmony, took on additional meaning when the Great East Japan earthquake struck, followed by the nuclear power plant explosion, as mentioned earlier. It made the artist's theme of death and rebirth seem like a prophetic reflection of a troubled era. Later, whenever these mass portraits were shown at art fairs around the world, people assumed that the streaks of silver mist on some of them, running down some of them, were somehow connected to the tsunami and its aftermath, even though they were mainly made in the year before the disaster. The shock of the earthquake catastrophe was all the greater in Kondō's case, as his wife is a native of Sendai in Miyagi Prefecture, the largest city in the worst-hit region of Japan. Some months passed as Kondō wondered what he could possibly do in the face of such vast human and material destruction, aside from making the local pots that he distributed. The Inochi no Utsuwa were both a practical and artistic response, but by far the most influential of Kondō's projects in the years after 2011 has been reduction. A series of about 21 seated figures made as life casts of his own body, reduced in size by 1/5 through shrinkage in the kiln, in a traditional Asian meditative pose. And you're lucky enough that here in Minneapolis, there are 2 such figures in the exhibition. Other iterations in the exhibition only have 1. Each reduction varies in the composition of the porcelain clay and the nature of its glaze. The sculpture in this exhibition, the one shown here, one of the 2, was cast from the same kind of marbleized clay already seen in the monolith and silver mist bowl, the swirling clay surface inevitably evoking the appearance of the tsunami, those photographs that we all see, as the sea swept in over the coast, carrying everything in its path. And this particular figure is particularly unusual, and do take a careful look when you get into the show, in that the clay was stabilized, the firing fault in the clay was stabilized by the artist using kintsugi, that now very, very well-known technique that's been sort of turned into a philosophical concept by some modern propagandists. But kintsugi, the well-known gold lacquer repair technique, beautiful as well as practical, that's more usually seen on tea bowls. And here, it's an eloquent metaphor for human fragility and resilience in the face of disaster. You can see 2 versions of reduction, as I mentioned, but I thought I'd also show you this less well-known version, another one fired like the bowls for life in a simple climbing kiln. And in addition, with acknowledgement to Matthew Welch, who's present today, there's a remarkable installation of a marbleized figure in the Rock Kakudō Pavilion, once built as a retreat by the great scholar and champion of Pan-Asian aesthetics, Okakura Kakuzo, that was destroyed in the 2011 disaster and restored in the following year. And when we see it in this wonderful photograph that Matthew picked for his catalogue essay, nothing could be more eloquent of this sense of the fragility of man against the forces of nature, the smallness that all of us somehow feel. The projectionist who helped me set up the lecture today said that he thought this was one of the most moving images he'd ever seen. And who could disagree? Now, Kondō goes on to address pressing contemporary themes, but having returned to the potter's wheel, a device so fundamental to the Kondō tradition, in order to make the Inochi no Utsuwa, he has recently been exploring anew the significance of vessel form and the nature of ceramic art. In the same way that the Fukushima disaster had reminded the world of the fragility of technology when confronted by overwhelming natural forces, Kondō has come to realize afresh that ceramic art is an endeavor requiring not just the exercise of the potter's skill, but also a recognition of spontaneous natural factors beyond human comprehension. In other words, a kind of equal partnership between man and his creativity, sometimes dangerous creativity, and nature in the form of clay, without which the natural resources, without which this creativity would be impossible, and which in a certain sense have a mind of their own. In recent years, Kondō has completed close to 100 hakuji otsubo, large white porcelain vessels, a series of outsized pots bigger than anything he's previously made on a wheel. Sometimes starting with upwards of 150 pounds of porcelain clay, he experiences the creative process as a kind of live performance in which subject and object, man and clay, constantly switch places until it's impossible to tell who's leading and who's following. It's worth mentioning, right, in this context, that he started out not as a ceramic artist, but as a champion level table tennis player. And he's compared the level of hand-and-eye coordination, the need to contend with the forces of nature, in this case, bounce, aerodynamics, gravity, as being an excellent training to good work on the wheel. These recent creations are large, dynamic, and generously formed, but at times split open, so that they're no longer literal containers, but abstract forms that interrogate the relationship between a vessel and its inner space. Not just expressions about the precarious present, but also meditations on the future of global ceramic art. These latest creations cannot but help us make us optimistic about the capacity of the Kondō family, both the first generation and the current generation, to transcend boundaries and keep surprising us all. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. We are continuing now with our conversation, and I have the great pleasure to introduce the distinguished guests here tonight who are joining me up here. So on my left, to many of you, Joan Mirviss does not need an introduction. After undergraduate studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Joan went to Columbia University in New York. In 1977, she opened her business as an art dealer and initially concentrated on paintings and prints. More and more, she developed an interest in ceramics, and her business shifted there eventually. Today, Joan is without doubt the most influential gallerist for Japanese ceramics outside of Japan, exclusively representing many of the major Japanese artists in the United States. On Joan's left, Jeffrey Horvitz undoubtedly has collecting in his blood. In the mid-1970s, while working on his second graduate degree at UCLA, Jeffrey began dealing in art. He eventually gave that up after moving from Los Angeles to Florida to participate more closely in his family's real estate business. In the late 1980s, Jeffrey Horvitz began concentrating on French Old Master paintings, drawings, and sculptures, and has the most important collection in private hands today. Besides that, there was a collection of Italian Old Master drawings. With his wife Carol, who is also here tonight, he built a collection of Chinese cinnabar lacquer, and more importantly to us, what might be the largest collection of Japanese contemporary ceramics in private hands. I'm not going to say that much about Joe Earle because you already have heard about him tonight. And then we're very honored that Kondō Takahiro himself is here tonight. Joining us from Kyoto, and he is awake, no jet lag right now. Born 1958, Takahiro is, as you have heard, the youngest and third generation of the Kondō family lineage of ceramic artists. And most of the objects in the exhibition, which is just over there, are by him. So, and the vast part of tonight's discussion is going to be about him. And on his right over there, we are very grateful to welcome, born in Tokyo, Professor Yamada, who teaches ceramics here at the University of Minnesota. He is an award-winning artist himself, and we have actually his work in our collection. So we are grateful that he joins us to assist us with translations for Kondō Takahiro. So please welcome all of our guests tonight. Now, I'm going to ask Joan the first question, and really, because of you, we're fortunate that we have actually Kondō's work here in the United States. So can you talk to us, please, how you established a relationship with him, when you started to represent him in the US, and a little bit about his reception in the United States?
Hi, everybody. It's a great honor to be back here in Minneapolis, and it's even more thrilling to be here with both the Horvitzes and Joe Earle, and most especially Kondō Takahiro, who over the past 3 decades has become much more than an artist to me, but a close friend. I'm sure most of you know that in Japan, social connections are more ubiquitous and pressing than any other place perhaps on the planet. And so one cannot just go to an artist's door and knock on it and say, hi, I'm Joan Mirviss from New York, let me in and sell me some stuff. You have to have connections, and you have to have a reason for being there. So how do I find artists in general? I rely on connections provided for me or recommendations from art professionals in Japan. Myself in traveling in Japan, going to exhibitions or looking through related periodicals. And most importantly for me, from Japanese curators located in Japan, high-level collectors, colleagues, art historians, and even other artists. The rare discovery of great art published in magazines is almost useless, to tell you the truth. You can't judge a book by a cover, you can't judge a pot by a page. Some Japanese gallerists are very serious about getting international recognition for the artists that they support inside Japan. And this is one of the situations where that was the case. That my introduction to this man and his wonderful work came from a gallerist named Gallery Nakamura in Kyoto, where his family were renowned Chinese antique dealers going back 2 generations. And the younger son at that point in time, we're talking about 1995, was interested in the work of local contemporary clay artists, mostly Sodesha. And he was doing exhibitions of works by Yamada Hikaru, Suzuki Osamu, Mori no Taime, Miyashita Zenji. And he was able to provide connections for me in the 90s to the work by these men, all exclusively men. And that entree opened doors for me. He hired a young woman named Ohara Noriko, who became my eyes, and she would travel all over Japan looking for young talents and make recommendations for me. And one was to go to a tiny gallery in Shibuya in Tokyo to go see the work of this unknown young man, Kondō Takahiro. And I fell in love immediately with a beautiful little incense box that I purchased on the spot. He was not there. So it took a little bit of time, I think 2 years, before she brought me to your house, Noriko-san, and we started a relationship. Her insight into going to that gallery at that point in time, for me, was life-changing, and maybe we owe her a great debt to make the connection at that point in time. His work, as you can see, and you are stifled by, compels one to want to touch it. You want to pick it up, you want to handle it, you want to see all 4 sides. Sorry, in the case of your exhibition, that's not possible, but you can imagine how seductive the work is. And if you look at the exhibition and realize 90% of the work there is owned by 2 individuals, Carol and Jeffrey, be careful, you too can become an addict. But back at that time when I was a dealer and doing fairs and exhibitions, I didn't have a brick and mortar gallery. So I collaborated with one of the leading dealers in what we now call design, Barry Friedman Gallery in New York. And Barry, together with Kondō, we worked together to establish his career. Our first collaboration was a show, interestingly, of these artists that had been introduced to me by Noriko, of Miyashita Zenji, Mori no Taime, Suzuki Osamu, one of the founders of Sodesha, And I insisted we needed to have 2 younger artists and at least 1 woman. And so we chose the artist Kishieko, and that should be a name that you're familiar to all of you here, because one of the great holdings in her work is right here in this building. And she was physically here in 1999 lecturing and teaching. So the youngest person I chose to include was Kondō Takahiro. And my pitch to Barry was, this is a young guy, you can't judge from these pictures, who's going to go somewhere. And if you put your faith in this man's work, you will be latching on to a great rising star. And it worked. The show was quite successful. One of the most important pieces in the show by Takahiro was purchased by the North's other pioneering collectors and is now in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum, is frequently on view. Very similar to the Galaxy work that you can see next door. Another pivotal event in my relationship with Takahiro was the acquisition by the Metropolitan Museum. In 2001, the then curator Miyako Murase came to me with her boss, James Watt, and they had decided that the Met was finally going to enter the 21st century. And the Asian art department was going to start with clay. And one of the first pieces they bought was an early piece by Takahiro that was temoku glazed, but it was a non-functional sculptural work. And that was very important for me as a dealer to set the stage for his importance, to be able to say there's a work in the Metropolitan Museum when they had almost nothing, was groundbreaking. Barry had a further 3 shows. Together, we worked on 3 shows at Barry Friedman Gallery in 2002, 5, and 8. And that brought us to the Head series. You saw those great slides from Joe of the heads, and that show was a success. Now, my reason for collaborating with Barry was that Barry was a great design dealer, but he had a totally different clientele than I did. My clientele were mostly Asian lovers of Asian art, were committed to museums that collected Asian art, and that was not the case with Barry. He was able to set the stage for Takahiro as a great world-class artist, and that did happen. When I finally opened my gallery in 2007, one of the first shows I wanted to do was, of course, with Takahiro, and we decided to do a show on the family, which is sort of what we have here in Mia today. And the title of that show was a Kyoto family, a traditional Kyoto family in transition. And we focused on the work of Yutaka with works by his father and works by his uncle, and did a publication, and Takahiro came to New York. He lectured at Columbia, and his work was given the gravitas that it well deserved at that early time in 2010. I then did 3 shows of his work in my gallery, and then in 2018, I was offered by the Gardner Museum in Toronto, the Ceramic Museum for Canada, to organize a show for them that they call Japan Now, on Japanese clay art, that went for almost a year. And they said they would like to offer a residency. And who else would I invite of all my artists would be Takahiro. So he bravely went to Canada in the dead of winter and lived in Canada for a few weeks and had a wonderful experience there. And his work really made a difference in many people's lives. But while we were there, we participated in a panel discussion, sort of like this, and we had a conversation. And he felt that that conversation had to be codified. And it had to be codified in Japanese for a Japanese audience. So that led to our book, The Allure of Contemporary Japanese Ceramics, which the subtitle in Japanese was, what is it Americans know about modern and contemporary Japanese clay that the Japanese just don't get? And that book came out in just before, 2 months before the pandemic, but it's still out there and circulating around, and many clay lovers in Japan have said it's an indispensable, actually quite shocking book. And of course, Mia's largely featured in that book with exhibitions of installations and exhibitions that were first done by Matthew and now done by Andreas. And all the world now knows about what the work Mia has done. But without Takahiro's insight and intellect and support through the years, that book would never done. But it's truly his reduction series that has put him on the sculpture map. And the very first reduction piece to enter a public collection outside of Japan was the piece bought by this institution, which has, I think, been lovingly on display since its acquisition. It's now moved, but maybe it'll go back, where it's surrounded by its Buddhist art cousins in conversation, and I understand has been movingly regarded by both young and old through the years in its many lives here in Minneapolis. Over these years, I have sold over 300 works by Kondō Takahiro. They have entered the permanent collections of prominent museums like the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Seattle Art Museum, Musée Guimet, and those are just the reduction works. The other 298 pieces are all over this country, including 16 museums in this country. Museums like São Paulo, the Fitzwilliam Museum in England, LACMA, Scotland, so forth. So I believe that Kondō Takahiro has been both a leader and a major figure in bringing contemporary Japanese clay art to its highest level, to an acme level. And for me, it's been a joy and a privilege to be on this journey together through almost 30 years, I guess. And for me to witness his development from making those little boxes with the incense burners back in Shibuya, Tokyo, to making these magnificent sculptures. So it's been just a joyful experience for me.
Well, thank you, Joan, for bringing him to us, really. Yes. In the vein what you said earlier about people being tempted, you might have noticed that the monoliths have some rope around them. We had to put the rope in because after the first weekend we discovered footprints. So some of our guests decided that they wanted to get a little bit too close to the work, and so I totally understand what you meant earlier. Jeffrey, you and your wife Carol are without doubt the most active private collectors of contemporary Japanese ceramics outside of Japan, maybe even in the world. Can you tell us about your ceramics collection and how your relationship with Kondō began?
It's sort of a long story, but I won't keep you that long. The origin isn't actually with Japanese ceramics itself, it's with collecting. So I had already, before I met Carol, I'd already started collecting old masters after having been dealer in 20th century art. But as she accurately puts it, she's 3D, but I'm 2D. That's not entirely true, but I get her point. So already had quite a lot of experience with not just collecting, but also buying art in all sorts of different fields. And to be collecting, as we think of it today for ourselves, is really not just buying art, but having a central focus and basically mass, quantity. So the way this sort of started, the predecessor was actually Chinese. So Carol has this interesting idea that if she can entice me with one object as a gift in some field of Asian three-dimensional art, that eventually something may stick. So this actually started with Chinese. And I said to her, well, look, if you're going to do this, let's be more organized about it and actually have a collection. And that led to the Chinese lacquer, which we're told might be the finest group of Ming and Qing Imperial Workshop lacquer. And it was really by eliminating jade, eliminating tomb material, huge amount which is fake, eliminating porcelains, which great ones are so expensive, they were expensive when they came out of the kiln. So in the mid-90s, we start with that. Not leaving well enough alone, along the way, this ends up with actually what was two of the finest Khmer bronzes, a superb Gandharan relief fragment, all of which now have ended up as we try to de-accession and limit our activities. So this sets the stage for Carol apparently going without me to the Japan Society and going to the gift shop, and she sees this little blue box with all this sparkly stuff on it. And she thinks, there's the trick. So this was a present for me. And I don't think it's in display in this version of the exhibition, but it's in the catalog. So I've explained this as like fishing. So you put a lure on thinking it'd attract the fish. If that lure doesn't work, you take the lure off, get another lure. Eventually the fish will bite and you kind of stay with that lure. So it was really through present buying that I said, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do this seriously, which led to a lunch with Joan Mirviss, about a block from the gallery, and having now experience with collections, both myself and selling to other collectors, we settled on a pretty simple idea. We were going to collect Japanese ceramics that were clearly Japanese, clearly contemporary, museum displayable, and museum quality. The two things are different. Museum displayable means, can you put this in a case? Pretty much. Is it too big? Is it too small? Museum quality is pretty much self-defined. So what that did was lead to also what we wouldn't collect. One of the most important was we wouldn't collect T-bowls because all we knew was how much we must not know about it. So that would take time. So it didn't mean we would never do it, but we would eventually get to it. Eventually has come to be something like 160 T-bowls. So this is, I infamously said at a Harvard talk about our collecting of French, it's like going to the pet store, buying 2 gerbils and forgetting to ask the sex. Next you have 4, then you have 8, then you have 16. So really the way we get to know Takahiro is actually not the person, it's actually the art. That's actually not a bad way to understand an artist's work because you're thinking about the art and you're beginning to absorb it, and it helps to have it in the house because you're around it. So the first piece is this little blue box that on Carol's extraordinary database, without which we could not do these things, I think that's November of 2006. 2008, we acquire what is in the exhibition, probably Carol's favorite piece of all, which is the tapered green vase with the green glass top. And I think it's well stood the test of time. So the collection then starts to grow. And one of our ideas about general collecting, at least as we do it, and I do not recommend you try this at home, folks, is to think about the art where we are stewards of the art. It is ours during our lifetime. The ownership is not really the important part. It is not our identity. Its status is what it is, but that's really not what we're doing. So all of this vast collection of some 1,500 objects is intended to go into the public domain, as will 2,000 French drawings, 200 French paintings. So we think about not just what we want, but this bigger picture. So I think it's almost a decade later that we actually meet the person who made these things. So again, for quantity, we may have more of Kondō Takahiro's pieces than anyone else. So just his portion, as opposed to the whole Kondō family, is something like 44 objects. The way this happened is basically Carol never met a Kondō Takahiro she didn't like. And she also never met one she didn't want to acquire. So that's actually a pretty large number. And fortunately, they're not all as large as the distorted white porcelain vase. So that's how the collection emerged. So eventually we meet him, and the essay of Carol's, the introduction to the catalog, which we recommend highly that you get, it's very interesting because the different essays have very different perspectives on how to think about his art. But it really describes an event that actually happened. So we're hosted through Joan's with friendship with Takahiro at a little reception in the evening with the family museum. The Gojozaka is basically desolate because all the shops are closed. We're finished with all that. We're walking down the road, and it's a lovely evening, and I'm ahead of Carol, who's chatting with Takahiro. And I overhear fragments of what she's saying, and she says, I'll do an exhibition of your whole family. So I start to slow up to make sure this is what I heard, and I'm piecing this together, what she is telling him in 2017, and I sort of let them catch up, and I pull her aside and say, Carol, what are you talking about? How are you going to do this? Don't promise something you can't deliver. And in the essay, it described pretty clearly her reaction is, and this is somewhat true, this just encouraged her all the more. So COVID put a time wrench into this. We weren't able to do it quite as soon as she thought, but in fact she did it. So that's sort of where we stand now. We are in the process of trying to figure out the deaccessioning long term. And Carol, I've described as the Johnny Appleseed of Japanese ceramics. She sort of proliferates the seeds around the museum world, working in total with some over 40 US museums. This isn't even the only exhibition that's traveling. The other one is Radical Clay, probably the most important and probably the last of the all-female artist. When it was at Chicago, had 150,000 visitors in the gallery over a relatively short course. What we're finding with museums is that in general, the material is hugely popular, even by people who know absolutely nothing about Japanese ceramics. They just take to this immediately. So Takahiro's work is particularly important in that it does come out of the family traditions in a sense. It is certainly, he's a Japanese artist living in Japan, but he's actually an international artist. He's an international artist in every way. Influences come from multiple sources. His styles are pretty easily recognizable. And the internationalization is not solely something with contemporary. It did actually happen in its first wave in the very late 19th century and going into the early century where Japanese artists were showing at world expositions to great acclaim. But he's singular in that it's such an astonishing level of quality, thoughtfulness. It has an intellectual aspect, has an immediately visual aspect. It has almost everything anyone would reasonably want. And there's also a personal connection because when you see the three monoliths, the white, the green, and the blue together, the green was Carol's 50th birthday present from me. It was purchased in advance and laid quietly in a cardboard box on its side in a locked luggage closet. The white one was a major anniversary present, which also lay dormantly for some years in the closet, untouched. She had no idea they were there. But typical of Carol, as much as they are personal to her, they are also important to us to be in the public domain in some way. So that's it's been more than interesting. And I really can't think of very many living artists who have the depth of intellectual understanding of their own work, the technical ability to do this work, the inventiveness to change the work as time goes on, and yet be simultaneously totally engaging with the general public that need not know anything at all about Japanese ceramics or ceramics in general.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you, Jeffrey, actually, for really sharing your collection with us. I think we have now, the first gifts received 10 years ago, and I'm looking forward to the next ones, and of course to more exhibitions that are coming to our way. You made two important points about the easily recognizable points of Takahiro's work. So I want to move on now to Kondō Sensei himself. So the two aspects that make your ceramics stand out from everybody else is the silver mist decoration, gintekisai, and then your use of glass. So what does silver mist mean to you, and what are you trying to convey with it?
まずはじめに皆さんにお礼を言いたいと思います。
First of all, thank you all for being here.
この展覧会は、マイアミから始まり、マイアミのローミュージアム、そして、昨年、ニューヨークのブルックリン美術館、そしてこのミネアポリスと3カ所を今回ってきました。
This exhibition has been traveling. It's a traveling exhibition. Started in Miami and then went to Brooklyn Museum and then came here.
で特に今回私初めてミネアポリスに来ましたけれども、素晴らしい展示にしていただいて、本当に喜んでいます。ありがとうございました。
First time to visit Minneapolis and very grateful of the people and also the installation.
そしてホルビッツさん、ご夫妻のサポートでこの展覧会が、実現して、まだ何か所かアメリカを回るみたいですけれど、本当に感謝申し上げたいと思います。
Thank you so much for the Horvitz. Jeffrey, thank you so much for your support and look forward to how this exhibition is going to develop further.
そしてジョン・ビー・マービスさんとはもう25年来、本当に作品がいいとか悪いとか、本当にお互いの意見を言える素晴らしいギャラリストと出会えたことも大きかったと思っています。
So I have been having a relationship with the gallerist Joan about 25 years. She's been a good critic, and we speak about the work very honestly, and that has been really helping.
そしてジョー・アールさんとも、もう多分知り合ったのは、20年近くになりますけども、今日も素晴らしいレクチャーをしていただいて、そしてちょうど、今回今ここにはないんですけれども、2年前に、僕の30年をまとめたアートブックを出版しました。その時のメインの編集をやっていただいて、本当にジョー・アールさんにもいろいろとお世話になってきました。
Sorry, I was looking for his name. Thank you, Joel, for exhibition 2 years ago and published the exhibition catalog and essay, and thank you for the lecture.
ありがとうございます。で、今の質問なんですけれども、1990年代初め、ジョー・アールさんのお話にもあったブラジルの後ですね。ブラジルの展覧会の後、私は、自分の個人作家としての、コンセプトや自分のオリジナルの表現を、模索していました。
As he spoke in his lecture after the exhibition in Brazil, this is about 1990, he began to be aware of searching for the original idea as an independent, as an individual artist.
で、その中で私が、生まれ育った、京都。京都は1200年続いてきた、都です。で、古いものと新しいものが、混じり合って、こう1000年続いてきました。その町から、相反するものとことを融合するっていう概念やイメージを京都の町から持つようになりました。
Kyoto, city of Kyoto, where he grew up, has 1200 years of history. And he began aware of old and new, things that are opposite, things that can be integrated. So those are character of the Kyoto, city of Kyoto. He began to be aware of that character.
で、1994年にちょうど京都の都ができて、建都1200年という記念の年に、私は父や祖父のいわゆる近藤家の染付のスタイルから離れた作品として、方形の形に幾何学抽象的な染付を描いた、タイム&スペースという、作品を発表します。
He presented geometric abstraction, based on the geometric abstraction. The title, it's called The Time and the Space. In 1994, this is when Kyoto had a 1200 years anniversary. Among his father and the whole Kondō family, among their works, but he departs from the family tradition, but then begin to work on the geometric abstraction. Yes.
で、実はもうこの時すでに、銀滴彩、シルバーミストの技法は成功していました。
And at this point, he has established this silver mist technique.
で、陶芸というのは、火で焼くっていうのがメインですけども、その火に対極にある水、私は土を媒介に火の中から水を表出するというコンセプトで、その後、この銀滴彩シルバーミストの作品を、作るようになります。
Ceramic uses a fire, which is one of the main elements in the practice. Water sits on the opposite position. And he was very much interested in using of clay coming out of the fire, but then as an expression, water as an expression. That resulted this silver mist series.
で、歴史的にこのブルー&ホワイトの最も象徴的な模様は、ブルードラゴン、青龍です。東アジアでは、ブルードラゴンは水の神様と言われています。
Historically, blue and white style, oftentimes in general, there are many blue dragon motif. In East Asia, blue dragon represents water goddess.
そういう意味で私のベースになっているこの染付は水の表象と考えています。
In that regards, his decoration in blue and white style, blue becomes a metaphor of water.
そういう意味でもこのシルバーミストは私にとって染付に代わる新しいオリジナルの表現となりました。
So that the silver mist replaced this idea of blue and white technique.
さらに2002年に、約1年間スコットランドのエジンバラの美術大学の留学で、ガラスに出会います。
he encountered the practice of glass at the Scotland Edinburgh University in 2002.
私はエジンバラでこのガラスを見たときに、氷だと思って、そして、自分の水のコンセプトに沿う素材だと思って、キャストの技法を、学び、その後、作品をガラスの中に組み込むようになります。
When he saw glass at the Edinburgh University, the first impression was ice. And then he studied casting glass and then began integrated into his work.
先ほどのスライド、ジョー・アルさんのスライドにもありましたように、私はスコットランドの最北の島、オークニーで巨大な、ストーンサークルからインスパイアされ、エジンバラで学んだガラスと磁器と銀滴彩を組み合わせて生まれたのがモノリシスシリーズとなります。
Another inspiration in the Scotland experience was a stone circle that he saw on the island, Orkney Island, very north of Scotland. And then the elements of glass, porcelain, silver mist became together with this inspiration, then resulted Monolith series.
21世紀が、この21世紀が水の世紀であり、地球は火の玉の惑星から46億年かけて美しい水の惑星となりました。水は気体、液体、固体と変幻自在に変化し循環しています。
Our planet, this is a 21st century, it is a century of water. The Earth was a planet of fire, and then 46 million years became, took 46 million, I actually have to calculate it might not be a million, it might be more than a million. Took that long time to become a planet of water. Water consists, can be gas, liquid, solid. They can mutate, they can transform into those three elements and then circulates.
そういう意味で、銀滴彩シルバーミストは浄化、循環を象徴し、モノリスは天と地をつなぐオブジェクトとして、作品を制作してきました。
So silver mist represents purification. Monolith connects heaven and earth.
ありがとうございます。So we've heard now about how you developed Gintekisai and how what it means to you, and so I'm moving on to Joe, who has told us about the family but now we have more information about Kondō-san himself. So since you're the man with all the experience, can I challenge you for the impossible? And could you put Kondō into the context of the gigantic world of contemporary Japanese ceramics?
Right. Well, you've had a lot.
We have 2 minutes. No, I'm kidding.
You've heard a lot from me already, so I'm not going to speak at any great length. And thank you also for warning me of this question. Going through my notes earlier today and thinking about the question as I read what I decided I was going to say this evening, one sort of thing that jumped out at me was, we go back to Grayson Perry again, who may seem a sort of bit of a comic figure from the context of Minneapolis. But anyway, he's a living national treasure in the UK. But when he got his award in 2003, what the Arts Council said about giving him the Turner Prize was they spoke about his uncompromising engagement with personal and social concerns. And I think that the thing that struck Kondō Sensei at the time was it's actually someone who's actually a potter. I think we'd all agree, not a terribly good potter in his case, but nevertheless, someone who uses ceramics can actually use ceramics to convey a much wider message, not just I don't mean in a sort of social campaigning sense, but a personal message. And also, as we look at Kondō-san's example, an artistic expression that's got a ceramic expression that's got a lot to say about the world beyond ceramics. And that is not all that usual in Japan, I would say. One often gets an artist statement. In fact, one almost invariably, if you're researching online quickly to say something about a group of artists, they've always got an artist statement, and they tend, on many occasions, not to say mostly the same thing, and it's not terribly meaningful. And it doesn't mean they're not good ceramic artists, but they perhaps haven't got a great deal to say beyond what they do, and that's fine. That's one way of approaching ceramics, and there are lots of great ceramic artists who do that. However, in the case of Kondō Yūzō, I think there's something very much more than that going on. We see it very early on with this sort of determination to break free of his inheritance while still respecting it. And I'd like to suggest there's a little bit of a parallel, though we don't have the documentation to be sure about it. When we look at the struggles of his grandfather through all those official exhibitions in the 20s and 30s, always constantly trying to do something new, something that goes a little bit beyond what he's been trained to do. But much more widely, in the case of Kondō Sensei, he's actually looking to do something that's more than just ceramics. And that interview that he has after he goes back to Japan from Scotland with Inaga Shigemi, who's a very interesting writer, where he says, first of all, I think the conversation about what's art and what's craft is just terribly boring and a complete waste of time. I think we can all of us sitting here can agree about that. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. But beyond that, there's also the sense that it's quite widespread in Japan even today, and there's nothing wrong with it, that, being a ceramic artist is just being a ceramic artist. But in his practice and in his communication, his development, and in his international travel, Kondō is doing something more. He's talking about the situation between man and nature, how we can over-influence nature, and that can not only create perhaps not the best ceramics, but also create not a very good world. That's a very interesting parallel, that by, there's a suggestion that by recklessly producing nuclear power in a way that wasn't very safe, you're utilizing a natural resource, and not in a very good way, with destructive results. And in the same way, he has this idea of responding to clay, that letting the clay letting the clay have its own mind, letting it collapse if it wants to. That's a sort of environmental message. So, we all agree about the excellence of what Kondō does, the fantastic variety, the way he's expanded into sculpture, the way he's returned to the West in a fascinating way. And if we had more time, we could find out what he plans to do next. But that's another story. But to me, the most important thing is it's not just ceramics, it's something else as well.
Thank you, Joe. To move a little bit away from Kondō Sensei, Joan, so over the past 40 years, you have represented not only him, but many other leading 20th century Japanese ceramic artists. So by what connections or methods did you first discover them, then represent them and promote them? Could you please give us a few examples?
With pleasure. So you heard a little bit about how I connected with the artist of the moment, which was through a professional connection. But I've used a number of different methods of sourcing great ideas on upcoming or established talents. But my basic criteria of what I'm looking for has never changed. It has to be an artist who's fundamentally gifted technician, who understands his or her medium and understands the need to make works that are stable, transportable, shippable, displayable, not just be in a cabinet, but how do you get them from point A to point B? I've seen so many young artists, particularly women, who have not been adequately trained, who make works that are destined for disaster by the time they arrive on the shores of this country. So those are sort of fundamental ideas from a technical point of view. But then the other half, and more important component, do they have an artistic vision? Do they have something to say? Do they have the potential for growth? It takes a lot of time, money, and effort to nurture an artist and work with them in the course of a career. And you don't want to make a mistake, and you don't want to be left with an artist who's a one-act artist, to say the least. And so you got to guess right. And sometimes it's a guess, but when you've been doing it for almost a half century, sometimes it's not so daunting. The person also has to have a unique vision. And as Tomimoto said, as you were talking, Joe, do not make pattern from pattern. Well, you can be the greatest T-bowl thrower and do great T-bowls as your great-great-great-grandfather did, but that's not of interest particularly to me. The T-bowl has to say something different and has to be a 21st century work of art and not be a glorified reproduction of what has been gone in the past. So how do I find the people who match these criteria? And how do I train my eye? Well, I look at as much as possible, and going back, you go to every exhibition you can run to. And in the old days, there used to be 30 exhibitions in the department store and galleries alone in Tokyo every week. So you sort of have to live there, but you can't live there. But you're running around looking. And in those days, I went to a lot of competitive exhibitions, trade organizations, and where you're seeing one piece by an artist. And that's very dangerous. And that might be the only good piece that person ever makes, and that's happened to me. It's really dangerous to acquire something from that kind of venue without knowing the general oeuvre of the artist. So if I find a piece like that that's of interest, I then make an appointment to go and meet them, hopefully with an introduction that somebody knows, Joan Mirviss knows what she's talking about, open the door to her, and then try to evaluate whether there's a sufficient body of work to merit further inspection. Touch is critical. You have to be able, and we're talking about Takahiro and how frustrating it is, you can't touch anything, but you can't judge a T-bowl by looking at a picture in a book, and you truly can't really understand much of clay without a familiarity of that man or woman's work and actually playing with it. My most successful connections have been through recommendations through knowledgeable Japanese professionals. One particularly through these competitive exhibitions, and mostly through curators, collectors, colleagues, and other artists. And surprisingly, the other artist part is extremely rare. I work with a number of artists who are chairs of departments in universities around Japan. They never tell me who are their gifted students. They never point me in the direction or say, go see this wonderful young talent. She just got an MFA. You should go off and see her. I often find these people and then go back to those professors and say, why didn't you tell me how great this person is? But it doesn't come that way. So I'm just going to give you 3 examples of the many artists I work with and how I found them. Could we have the first slide, if that's possible? In 1983, I came to the exhibition that Joe was a part of in Washington, D.C., called Japanese Ceramics Today, that for me was at the Smithsonian Institution. And there were the collection of a woman named Kikuchi Tomo, who was one of the great patronesses of Japanese clay art and was very instrumental to bring the field to where it is today. She owned a gallery in Tokyo called Kondō, and this exhibition changed my life. I went in there and there was easily 100 or plus pieces in that exhibition, and I fell in love with the work of Kawase Shinobu. I was a newly minted master's degree candidate from Columbia University, thoroughly grounded in Edo period art. But I loved clay. I used to be an arts and crafts counselor. I taught little kids how to make ashtrays. But this man really got to me. So being the audacious 25-year-old or whatever I was, I decided I had to meet him. So I went to Japan the next year. I was going to Japan to see ukiyo-e auctions and exhibitions. I got a connection through the cousin of Nakamura Yukio, who I mentioned before, from Shogado, Kyoto, and Kawase turned out to be his customer. He bought antique Chinese art from them. And she introduced me to Kikuchi Tomo. We went to Oiso, and we had dinner together, and we forged a bond. So this is 1984. For 10 years, I was not allowed to buy anything directly from him. I could only buy from his two representatives, which was Kochukyo, major dealer in Chinese antiquities, and Gallery Kandori, Madame Kikuchi's place. And I got no discounts from anybody, but I still managed to buy things and still sell them because I was then able to cherry pick great stuff. From that, another 10 years, now 20 years invested with this artist, I finally got two of his big patrons to support the ability that I would be a viable venue for him and I could hold shows for him in America. And I became his third agent. To this day, Madame Kikuchi passed away in her gallery closed. It's only Kochukyo and me. And I have represented him now with 8 exhibitions. And his work has just gotten better and better. But in order to work with him, he said he had to make different work for me. The work for Kochukyo was more traditionally Chinese focused. The work for Madame Kikuchi had more sense of modernity. And what was going to come to America was going to be even, for him, more audacious. And also meant larger, because the Japanese think Americans only like large works. And that hasn't changed. But we have been able to work together for now almost 40 years, right? 40 plus years. And he's still one of the great talents who keeps growing, challenging himself within a very defined window. And I see him as an equally great artist to Kondō Takahiro, but with a bigger foot in tradition. The second artist that I'd like to point out to you, you should know, because her work is on view right now in this building. Timing can be everything. And I've been a pretty lucky person that I somehow happen to be in the right place at the right time in my profession for so many cases. So the artist Fujikasa Satoko came to me.
Could we have the next slide, please?
Oh, sorry, thank you. Look familiar? It's now on the 3rd floor right now, and there's a smaller work on view in the Japanese galleries, right?
This picture is during Art and Bloom last year.
So Carol and Jeffrey will remember this well. I was taking a group of ardent collectors around Japan, and we made a visit to Hagi, where this artist was born. And we were at the Hagi Origami Ceramic Museum, and the curator, the director at that time, Ishizaki Sensei, says, oh, and she took us around looking at antique Chinese ceramics, Korean ceramics, ukiyo-e prints. Well, we've got this show of this young woman. I don't know if she's any good, but she won this prize. And the prize is that she would get a solo show in the Hagi Museum. So our troupe of intrepid travelers opened the door. It's a black room with spotlights, and all the work is in white. And I can hear Carol screaming in my ear, "Is it for sale?" And to make a very long story short, our group bought half the show. And one of the works from that show was acquired the next year. After we had to draw lots, right? And everybody had to say which ones they wanted, and then we would hopefully get everybody their first choice. And I think the smaller piece here came from that, I believe, that's on view now. And Jeffrey and Carol bought quite a number that are now in museums around the United States. But a large one that I bought that for some reason none of everybody else bought was bought by the Metropolitan Museum. And that was under John Carpenter. And that piece was placed really spectacularly on the 2nd floor balcony. So as you enter the museum, It's almost the victory of Samothrace up there, and your eye, it's the only piece of art you can see on the second level as you enter the building. So that was an incredible gift and an incredible disaster for me, because anyone who read that label was contacting me, where do I get a piece by her? I want a piece by her. And these were people who were not interested in Japanese clay. They're collectors of contemporary sculpture, very prominent collectors of modern European painting. They all wanted a work by her, but her work is incredibly difficult. It's classical sculpture in a Western sense. She has a very high attrition rate, and these works take 6 months to create, and she can only work on 2 at a time. So the waiting list for her work continues to be deep, and you guys are so lucky to have more than one. She, of course, is very grateful. So that was a recommendation by a woman winning a prize, and we happened to be there at that time. More recently, if we can have the next slide. This is the unusual situation of when an artist recommends another artist. And in this case, I have Kondō Takahiro to thank for this, that I was visiting him at one point 5 years ago, and he had just been a judge in an important competition for graduate students. And he himself had awarded this young woman the prize, the Kyoto Shimbun Prize. And he said, you know, Joan, you might like her work. And he showed me this little picture about this big, and he could see that I was intrigued. So being the man he is, he picked up the telephone and called her while I was standing there. And he said, I'm about to change your life. I'm going to introduce you to Joan Mirviss. Just do what she says. Okay. So that was the start of another beautiful relationship. And this young woman is now only 35 years old. I started working with her when she was 31. Just yesterday, Carol sent me an image of her radical clay banner for the show, which is now at the Auckland Museum in North Carolina. And this woman's work is now, 10 feet tall on the banner on the outside of the building. It was the lead Come Hither poster at the Art Institute of Chicago, paired with Picasso Go Left, Japanese Clay Go Right. And as you heard, there were 150,000 people involved with that. And Joe just said to me a little while ago, well, she's got to do something different. Her work is intriguing. Everyone enjoys her work. What is inside these vessels? What are these packages, these bundles? Many people said, how do you untie it? You know, they don't understand what it is, but they are captivated and mesmerized by the trompe-l'oeil quality about the work, as well as the puzzlement of what could be inside. Is it a box? Is it a Japanese tsubo, large vessel? Is it a tea bowl? What could it be? And her work has gotten more complex. But Joe said, you know, you don't want her to be a one-act pony. You know, we want her to continue to grow and maybe wrap things. There must be somewhere to grow. And I would argue it's grown. But her work is so compelling and so evocative that she now has worldwide recognition at the tender young age of 35. And she's been awarded a residency, and currently she is now in Limoges, France, as a resident of the Bernardaud factory, one of the lead manufacturers of porcelain ware in the world. And she's going to be studying the world of porcelain. Everything else is made in stoneware. So this is a completely different art form. And she's going to be working with the best mold makers and mold casters maybe in the world. Let's see what happens. 3 months in France with no French language, but a little bit of English, something will change. Meanwhile, she has a commission from the perfume company Guerlain to design their next perfume vial, which is going to be called Sakura, and which will now be made by Bernardaud. And Bernardaud, if she produces something interesting, will do a limited edition of her work, of which she will make money from, and it will be available in limited edition. And she's just asked, she can't do it, by Bottega Veneta, for them to do a bag for their next show that would be based on her bags. So her appeal is universal, and it came from literally introduction from that man there. And her life has been changed, my life has been changed, and you can see when a creative curator chooses to use her work in a new environment and use it like Andreas has done here with a very important Zen painting of a famous Zen deity carrying his sack of good fortune, and placing her piece in juxtaposition, the humor and the juxtaposition, shall we say, of what used to be called fine art versus what used to be called craft, has now become synonymous together. And she too is transforming the field in her own way.
Thank you, Joan, and I'm very happy that this work by Tanaka Yū is actually one that won an award in Japan, and so we're grateful that we have an important piece here in our collection. Jeffrey, we heard already from you that Carol decided there is going to be a Kondō exhibition, and so what was she trying to achieve with that? What's the aim for that? And so what are the next venues? Where is it going after us?
So, before I actually answer that, I want to give a larger footnote to what Joan talked about. Some of the specifics sort of matter. First of all, if you haven't figured this out already, artists need really good dealers. They need a dealer, first of all, but to have someone like Joan to help them, to guide them through, to give a dispassionate outside opinion about their work, about what's saleable. Very few of them are financially independent, and some are willing to work on the edge of poverty to do their work, but many of them are clueless. When I was a young dealer, I elected not to deal with living artists. It's just not something I wanted to try to do. But the two footnotes are two of these three, well, actually the three artists. So one is Kawase Shinobu. It is possible that we actually have more of Kawase Shinobu's work than of Kondō Takahiro's. This is a personal favorite of Carol's. She, again, never saw one she didn't like, and if never, that means one she didn't want to buy. I put some brakes on this. He is an exceptional artist, and the quality of the ceramics of the Celadon is just superb. Very top level of living Celadon artists in Japan. Moving on to Fujikasa. So what actually happened was we walk up to the second floor as we're supposed to be leaving the Hagi Museum, and everyone comes to a dead stop at the doors. And on my left are four large-scale works. This large scale becomes an important part of the story. And I turned to Joan and said, are these for sale? And I didn't stop there. Atypical for me, I didn't think to ask how much they might be if they were for sale. Very unusual for me. So I said, before she went off to find out, I said, if they're available, we will take two of the four. Again, I have no idea what this is going to cost. Museum itself, I believe, bought two, and another museum had one on reserve, so we got the other. These were the only four large-scale works in the exhibition. Everyone else in the group bought, I think, one piece, and then I turned to Carol and said, this is what I think we should do. We bought 6 or 7, which was sort of the majority of what remained of the exhibition. I said, these are never coming home. These are going to go out to museums, and it'll make an instant resume. No one will know how they got there. No one will know they were bought by one collector to help this woman who we thought was really a superstar. Lo and behold, she is a superstar, and she's lived up to all of our expectations. Tanaka Yū is kind of, so basically we become the informal patrons without saying anything to her to make sure that she doesn't do what she considered was get married, have babies, and stop doing ceramics. She told me this, and I said, no. So Tanaka Yū, I think in an 18-month period, we may have purchased the lion's share of all of her larger scale works. It was, again, with the idea, there's not so many, because they're harder to make, and it's this size of the kiln limits how many she can make. So the idea was similar. We are going to see, we've seen someone who we think is a superstar, and these were never intended to be kept by us as a group. These were intended to go out to museums. And more or less, demand has exceeded supply. Every museum wants one. There are a couple more artists also that we sort of function without them knowing it, where we think that they have still unrealized potential. But anyway, going back to the actual question, it's like giving a deposition where you don't answer the question you were asked. So as I look around the room, the only thing I could hope for is every seat would be taken. Why? Because both with the French collection and with the Japanese ceramic collection, the most important thing of all for us is actually super high visitor counts. In other words, we want lots of people. We're not talking about like hundreds. We're not even talking about thousands. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that we think should see these things that the majority of whom have never seen before. And if they don't see it, they won't know if they like it. If some of the people don't like it that much, that's fine. But our ambitions for the ceramics are vast, and this exhibition is proving to be just as we thought. Hugely popular, people love it. Not a huge surprise to us, of course. It's visually engaging. Do they have to know anything about it to like it? No. They don't need instructions. They don't need elaborate wall labels to enjoy it. We want people to go in and see these works of art and find pleasure in it, to find it fun, to find it engaging, to find it stimulating. If it's not doing that, it's not doing the job we intend. So the purpose of this exhibition was to highlight, I shouldn't say we, Carol, I thought the idea, as I told you, was sort of crazy at first. How was she going to do this? We hadn't so much experience yet with these things. And basically the idea was the work deserved to have a much broader exposure. And that exposure by broader, we're not, again, not talking about a dozen people. We're not talking about specialists. We're not talking even about people who like Asian art or Japanese art. We're talking about people who will respond to this at least sort of like we do. And that's actually working out. So volume is important. It was very important for how I've handled the French collection. These French art, they tend to see, they at least sort of know, maybe you can't tell an Italian painting from a French painting, but you know it's an old master painting. So as to where it goes next, I had to write it down because I keep forgetting the sequence. So it's been at the Lowe Museum at the University of Florida in Miami. It's been at Brooklyn. It's here now, obviously. What's interesting is to see every installation, even I see something different. Each curator or director has a different way of displaying things where the works, I don't want to use the trite phrase, they talk to each other. They don't talk at all, they're ceramics. But you can see by their proximity relationships. Of the three so far, this is probably the most, in a good sense, didactic, because the arrangements allow you to see comparatively several dimensions of similarity and differences. And it's rather cleverly done because it's easy to see it. Gallery talk I gave this afternoon, I sort of helped the visual a little bit by explaining what to look at this and look at this, but most of it speaks for itself. So anyway, after this, it goes to the Crow Museum in Dallas. Trammell Crow Museum was the private Asian museum, basically get over to the Dallas as a separate, as now integrated with University of Dallas. Then it goes to Seattle. Then it goes to the Crocker, which has itself major holdings of ceramics. One donor in the past gave them 1,000 pieces of American ceramics. So that's 7, but we apparently there are, I have a day job, so I don't keep track of all this. So there are 4 more museums that have shown serious interest. Carol is thinking maybe it should stop at 7. I disagree. The more people who can see this, the better. Why not? We have more ceramics at home. We can go visit them. I really don't know. This will stop at some point. But the popularity, to have that many museums that all want an exhibition is most unusual. I wouldn't say it's impossible or super rare, but this and Radical Clay, the women's show, is another one like this. Every museum seems to want it. Not all of them can accommodate it, but everyone does. So our ambitions are not exactly shrinking, and our ambitions have very little to do with us. Our ambitions are to have this type of material and the best of it with the best artists, best being a broad category, not the singular masterpiece. It's important to understand that difference. To me, there are no singular masterpieces by any artist. There's categories. So we want you all to, not just to see it, but to love it, to go away thinking about it and thinking, boy, that was a really great thing to see. I'm sure glad we stumbled into that gallery. That probably gives me the most pleasure of all when someone does not even intentionally go to see it. They walk through it, they stumble into it because they're lost, and stay and see it and say, yeah, I don't know what this stuff was, but it's really cool.
Thank you, Jeffrey. We are out of time, but I would like to end the evening with one last question for Kondō Sensei. So what's next for you? What are we to expect or look forward to in the future from you?
まあ私のこれまでの中で2011年の東日本大震災と福島の事故は、私の人生に世界にとっても日本にとっても私にとっても大きな、衝撃でした。
It was a very shocking experience to see the tragedy in Fukushima in 2011.
で、その時に、改めて、自然と人間との関係を問い直すことになりました。
That gave him opportunity to re-question the relationship between nature and human.
そしてその後作ってきたのが、津波からインスパイアされたウェーブシリーズ。そして震災で亡くなった人への鎮魂と、自らが瞑想を使用する、座像のリダクション。そしてその後自分のろくろでスローイングで、できる作ることのできる最大の大きさの白磁の壺を、作るようになりました。
This experience resulted to three series of works. Wave series. This was very much inspired by the tsunami. And then seated statue. Those are really thought of those people who lost their lives. And then large vase, porcelain, white porcelain vase.
そして今、次のシリーズというか、最後のステージというか、今、まだ明確にはないけれども、一つイメージをしている、作品があります。で、そのために、昨年私は京都の花瀬、少し山の中なんですけど、そこに、登り窯、クライミングキルン、薪の自然の薪で焼く、クライミングキルンを作りました。
He has an idea that is not quite clear, but it's there. Because of this reason, he decided to build Noborigama climbing chamber kiln in outside of Kyoto.
この見えないもの、英語でどういうふうに訳すのか、ちょっとなかなか皆さんにイメージが伝わらないかもしれないけど、見えないものという陶芸の持っている 本質と、対峙するために登り窯が私には必要だと思いました。
The main character of ceramics, he sees the invisible. For this invisible, to explore this invisible, he thought that he believed that this wood fire, wood kiln is necessary.
先ほど私にとって相反することとものの概念やイメージが制作における自分にとって重要な発露、自分の影響をしてきた、コンセプトというか、っていうことを、申し上げました。
As I mentioned before, when he was talking about the city of Kyoto, he's interested in this things that are opposite of situation.
で、今私のテーマは、偶然と必然、コントロールすることとコントロールできないこと、如意不如意、エレメントのリレーションということが、テーマになっています。
From that point, his theme currently is coincident and necessity, control and uncontrollable, as one wishes and unsatisfactory, relationship of elements, so forth.
その課題と向き合い深めていくために、京都に自分の登り窯が必要だと思いました。
I thought that this new Noborigama climbing chamber kiln is necessary because so that I can explore these themes.
見えないものを迎えに行くこと、出会うこと、自分の作品の中に呼び入れること、それが集大成の自分にとっての集大成の作品へとつながっていくと思っています。
To move forward, he's interested in this invisible. How to seek the invisible, how to invite the invisible, how to call invisible. These are the main theme for moving forward to his practice.
まだこれからです。今後も期待しつつ皆さん見守ってください。よろしくお願いします。
It just started. Please, I appreciate your encouragement and support. Thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we're impatiently waiting to see what's going to come in the future from you. Thank you to all the panelists for a wonderful evening, and for those of you who want to continue reading, the exhibition catalog is available in the store, and for those who think you want to live with a piece, I think I know somebody where you can get something for home. Thank you and have a safe trip home.